to this segment of our 2019 Online Grief Symposium. I am Kristina Risinger, grief coach at KristinaRisinger.com, and I am going to welcome Sarah Jane Farrell. Hi, Sarah Jane.
Hi.
Sarah is a nervous system specialist and therapeutic coach who specializes in helping highly sensitive empaths heal from codependency and narcissistic abuse. So she is going to be sharing how to grieve well. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. And I just want to say thank you for really raising awareness on a very uncomfortable topic that really needs to be spoken to. So thank you for creating this. It's wonderful.
Definitely. Grief is something that I think more people need to come out and talk about. I think that it helps with the healing process and the awareness
Mm.
is very necessary to be there. So, um, I'm going to ask you to first off talk to us about abandonment and unresolved trauma as you see it in your experience and in your work.
In so many ways, I suppose I got all my experience out in the field. I came from a country that was in a very violent bush war in Zimbabwe, and pretty much everybody was in a very hyper aroused state, and so this is kind of was my normal. And then I moved to another country. I'm now in South Africa, where there is so much grief, there is so much unresolved trauma, and when we kind of start looking at what's underneath the collective trauma, most of the time it comes back to um, our really early age of pre 3 year olds, where we're pretty much imprinted. We're like big sponges, and we're taking in everything in our environment, including how secure our parents are feeling at the time and how well they're managing stress and being able to hold a space of safety. So that's kind of where my work starts, is really getting very curious about what happened in your childhood, what happened in utero, because a lot of times, and science is proving this, that we can have intergenerational familial trauma passed down through generations. And basically it is that place of when we don't have secure attachment, or we're not able to protect ourselves as children, even if the person that's supposed to be protecting us is doing the best that they can, but they don't make us feel safe, then we start to take on adaptions of our true nature, really, because there's this sort of internal collapse that we don't feel safe, and we need to find a way to create our own safety. So a lot of times in those sort of survival responses, it can cover up a lot of anger that's actually suppressing grief, and it can take you out of being able to form healthy relationships early later on in life. And I've seen it even affect people as far as being able to have their own children, because there's this deep inhibited anger inside that's hiding the grief of everything that I have goes away, or that I can't create my own safety, and the people that I'm trusting to keep me safe are not. So there's always either this very primal freeze state that happens on the subconscious, that puts us into a place where we start shaming ourselves, or we think that we are wrong. That's all really rooted in early childhood trauma. So I really am on a mission to get people to grow up their child parts and to create their own sort of internal safety, so that they can go out and do what they came here to do in the world.
Um, you said that you work with empaths, and my question is, how much of this do you think is maybe personality driven versus the type of trauma you may experience? Um,
Mm,
is this kind of across the board, or is it something that different people with different personalities handle? Because we.
yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know how I can answer that in kind of a very short sentence. But I think that if we start to even look at reframing how we tick, what our personality traits are, and get back to the the ways that we play small, or the way that we try and make ourselves fit in because we're afraid of being abandoned. That's really the only thing that we fear, is not having safety, connection, and belonging. So when we look at personality, I think the personality is shaped again very early on in finding ways. So the coping strategies, or what people call limiting beliefs, I always say there are no limiting beliefs. There are just beliefs that we formed in our developing brain as children to keep ourselves safe or defend ourselves from danger. So I think it's all comes down to not necessarily the trauma or the traumatic events, but how we move through trauma in a healthy way. So how do we make sense of it? How do we make meaning out of things like loss or grief? And not only in the big traumas like death of a family member, or divorce, or incarceration, or divorce. Those are what are termed big traumas. But I find more damage of this sort of what I call self shredding, where we actually start to self reject and self abandon ourselves, comes from the chronic, unpredictable, toxic stresses. So things like being bullied constantly as a child, or being constantly criticized, or feeling like you are wrong, right? That's the difference between shame and guilt. Is, as children, we think that because our parents are perhaps fighting, or in the case, in the worst extreme cases imaginable, where one child has died in the family and you're the survivor, that the survivor guilt comes from the place that I was the one that should have died.
Yeah.
So we get all these imprints that actually shape our persona and how we're showing up in the world. Um, and I think that, I think we're all sensitive. We come in being very sensitive, knowing we're connected to something greater than ourselves as children, and that anything is possible until we kind of, life has at us, right? We experience life through the eyes, or the examples, so the actions of our primary caregivers, and then we adopt them, and it becomes a program that runs on top of what we knew to be true. So, it's just like from thinking you can have anything, your parents say, well, you can't. Money doesn't grow on trees, or who do you think you are? And it's all this sort of shaming behavior that very well-meaning parents often give to us, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to find a way to actually belong to ourselves, or have any kind of semblance of who am I being,
Right.
because we don't know.
Yeah, and we start building barriers and putting up walls so
Yeah,
you don't get hurt because you want
exactly.
pain. And
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So you and I had previously discussed how we can learn from indigenous cultures about living
Mm.
well and dying well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would love to, because I think this is where I have really done so much of my own work in healing from loss and grief. And what I love about it is that they really speak to grief as a state of being, a feeling state, rather that it isn't one thing, but that it's everything, that it's an invitation to really, really feel and be able to sit in the shadows, to sit in what I call like the waiting room, where we've sort of got one foot in the old world of having this person there, or having some kind of identity in the roles that we're playing, or in our success, and the other foot's not quite in the world beyond the world that we had with the living that's now past. And I just think that there's, what it's taught me is that it's a skillfulness. It's a willingness to be immersed in life. I think the Serenity Prayer has tried to do a really good job with that, in sort of rotating around this idea that we actually have no control other than how we are feeling in any moment. And when when we're not in the moment, we're not present to be with the energy of what is coming up, and what is coming up for other people that are in grief. So I think grief is the antidote to the Serenity Prayer. Um, I don't think it replaces it, but I think grief lets us feel what it means to be human. It reminds us to stay humble because no one's experience of loss or grief is going to be the same as yours. And I think it also, the joy in a very sort of heavy subject is that grief allows us to feel joy too, to feel happy. And I think so many people, when they're in that space, even if you sort of look at the Jewish traditions, who talk about sitting Shiva for 40 days. And I've seen this with the Greeks. I'm married to a Cypriot, and there's a ceremony around grief. And that's what the ancient mystery schools gives in honoring of the living, that this person lived well. Mm-hmm. And in the process of grieving, then there has to be some kind of joy to remember, first of all, that there's an impermanence of things, that an object of love isn't eternal, whether that's a person or an animal or the death of a dream, but that we have to get into a space of loving that pain that arises, to love the moments of joy, because when you've gone through an excruciating loss that is totally unimaginable, like losing a child, that there is some responsibility to their legacy to be joyful, that they wouldn't want us um, to dim our light because they're gone, and do what like you're doing, to take that as the gift that you then bring into the world from your experience to help other people that are going through that. So I think it's a very active form of loving grief, because it's preparing us for loss every single day. We just have to look at nature, don't we, to see that the trees lose their leaves in autumn, that everything goes down to the roots. There's a sense of stillness in it because you can't see new growth until the season for growth is there. And that I think that we've somehow detached from that we are part of nature. And if we're going to care about nature, the nature of things, which is living our best life, we have to care about the nature of the death cycle too.
Yeah, it said so many beautiful things there. And for those of you who have not seen me or watched anything that I've done, we did lose our youngest 2.5 years ago. So that's why she mentioned losing a baby. But one of the things, the first thing that you said is just really sitting in it. And I think that when someone passes away, you tend to do one of two things. You either stay in a place where you are stuck, where you really just torture yourself. And I think this is probably somewhat normal, especially in the beginning, when this is something that is just really super heavy, and it's never going to go away, but it can move forward. However, or the other thing that you do is you may rush to move forward. You hear of people selling houses and getting rid of clothes and things like that, and then other people they'll hang on to those clothes for years and years and years. I myself kind of did a combination of both. There were some things that we had to move along, and then there are other things that I'm not sure that I'll ever give away. I have a trunk, with some of her things in it. And so, but being able to sit and just process that grief and know that those emotions are real, and try to find out where they're coming from. But also, another thing that you said is to have joy, and that comes, I believe, from gratitude. And I'm kind of iffy about saying that to someone who has a very fresh loss, because that might stir up quite a bit of anger. Say, oh, you want me to be thankful. But, I think you might agree that when we are thankful for things, it can be something that our loved one did, some time that we had with them, or just whatever that is around us, the breath in our lungs, even now, the ability to go talk to other people and help other people is really something that is super healing in and of itself. Would you?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think you said that so beautifully. Is that it's giving yourselves the space to choose moment to moment, because that's all you can do when you're in that deep suffering. Um, to to it's kind of, for me, it's the endings of life always give life meanings. Just like you said, if I hold on to a lock of hair, whether that belongs to, you know, a loved one, whether it is your beloved horse that you've spent 30 years with, it's a relationship. And I think that those 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 are like memories that give meaning to a chance for gratitude to show itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like death. Death isn't an option. I think it's an obligation. I think it's huge in the way that it holds us responsible to include the suffering and to live it well. That's our work. That's the work that you're doing in the world. So I think you're absolutely, really, really correct in saying that death death has no ending, and grief has no ending to it. And when you can hold space for that in the feelings, to grieve, I think I always say you have to grieve well in order to live well, because you can't know what life is, how precious it is, until you've lost it.
Well, it really is somewhat of a growth of character. I mean, when you someone and you're grieving, you, like you said, you have no choice. They had no choice. That, you know, you hear there's two things that we can't avoid, are death and taxes. Well, to be honest, you can evade taxes. You know, you really have a choice. It's just you need to make the good choice. But with death, you don't have a choice. And neither does the person who is still here on earth. You know, they have to live, and it is a choice to live well or to not live well, like you're saying. And your loved one would not want you not to live well. And another thing, I think you just brought up is maybe honoring that person. Can you maybe explain how you feel that we can still honor the person who has passed? Because I think that maybe sometimes people get caught up in that they don't want to move forward because they see it as moving on, and it's not the same thing. You're not forgetting the person, you're not leaving them behind. You can move forward and, in fact, honor their life very much so. So, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I love what you say, because that's exactly it. Living is the honoring of the ones that are no longer with us. And I think that pain and that loss, they need to be expressed in order for us to feel complete. So I love what Alice Miller says about that we become the enlightened witness, not only to what we are being after the loss, but in witnessing not only your pain without judging it. I think that's the big part, or trying to diminish the experience, or going into berating yourself because moments of joy show up in relationship to other people. What you had is unique to you. You're never gonna have that. Just like you, there's nobody else like you on the planet that's living your experience and telling your story. Every relationship is a new opportunity, as you said, for growth. Um, and it's not about diminishing the experience. So whatever your loss, there's always wisdom giving it a voice. And I think that's the gift of what we bring into other relationships. You know, there's relief in speaking about our pain, um, in the company of those who can make space to hold it without trying to jump in and fix it, or move past their own discomfort. And I think that's what I love about, and what I've learned from wild animals, is that they mourn the loss. If you see elephants in the wild, there's an incredible honoring and reverence of the wisdom of their ancients. You know, they come back to the bones of their ancestors every year, and they make rumbling noises, and they spend time grieving, and they spend time remembering. Um, and I think that they're never traumatized, that it's just the most beautiful if you see it, when you witness it. And I take people on safaris in Africa to do just this, to come back to their hearts, is it's just beautiful because it's what love would be in that moment. And they don't let themselves complete the recovery process or to say, okay, time for grieving is over.
Yeah.
There's a seasonal flow of it, just as you know. Sometimes waves of grief can come over you out of nowhere, and it just takes your breath away. And then there are other moments where you kind of feel like you're pretty much doing a good job of living your life.
Mhm.
And I think that animals, again, are such great teachers because they don't have a society around them. They don't have those cultural mores and morality that are disapproving of their natural responses and trying to distract them. You know, I think that's what we've lost in the ancient traditions of grieving well, is that we're told that there's a timeline on grief, that you have to get back to work, and you know, you have to get on with your life, and you need, you know, it's time to pack the clothes away, as you say. And I think grief works the same way, that if we're unable to fully express our feelings because we're afraid we're going to make other people feel uncomfortable about what we've lost, um, then we have to get into the busyness of looking after others. I think that often happens, and perhaps you can relate to that, that
Yeah.
in a way to sort of bypass or trying to resist the resistance of pain that's coming up, we start to caretake for others. And that in itself is a very dishonoring process of living and celebrating the ones you've lost. So, you know, I think that space, that holding space,
Mhm.
and giving grief a sound, you know, that's something else that I think animals and the indigenous cultures can give us if we're only willing to receive it, is it's very primal and it's very cathartic. You know, our bodies need to feel the loss. We can't do it from our heads. So writing and music and art or wailing, you know, if you go to African funerals, they wail and howl and sing and beat drums and get close to the earth. And it's a very cathartic process of natural breathing that allows your body to feel it. Your body needs to, it's the body that holds on to the trauma.
Right.
So, you know, if you can find a place of safety, sometimes in support groups, in forums like this, where people can witness your grief,
Right.
then there's nothing to do. You know, there's nothing to do except be in the feeling and stop. Then there's no fear, you know, to acknowledge that you're in pain or that you are honoring and witnessing the pain of somebody else. So if we can just listen to it and make space for it, then we can start to surrender and move forward.
I think that that is so important because, you know, when you lose somebody, and I'll give you an example for me, it's it very much attacks your body. I became sick. I thought, you know, something was wrong with me physically, and it was. I was getting sick. My immune system was, you know, lowered, and but like you said, it affects your body. You carry that energy in your certain organs, and you're unable to, I guess, detox in a way unless you allow yourself to feel all of the pain, and all of the emotions. You know, if you continuously try to suppress all of those emotions, in a way of coping, you're just stuffing things, and it builds up over time. And I think that, you know, it could possibly end up being an explosion eventually. And it does affect your relationships with other people. It affects how you, just go about life. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing when you're able to welcome that, as a process, and work your way through it, walk through the valley, as I often say, instead of trying to go around it, then, there's where your growth comes.
Yeah. And you talking about, you know, not taking care of yourself. You
Hmm.
know, I think that's the most radical act of love that you could give to the one that you're grieving. Because when we don't, as you said, your when you push your emotions down, which are just your body's way of showing you, that something is out of alignment or needs your attention, when we're not caretaking that, then it does affect our immune system, especially after shock and trauma. You see this so often. Two people can walk away from a car crash and one carries on fine and the other one is like down for months with whatever debilitating pain that is, because they haven't had a way to process grief in a healthy way or to move through the experience um, and make some kind of sense out of it. So it's very non-linear in the way that it moves us. And again, I think it's important to just keep reminding yourself from a place of very compassionate holding that you can't control it. It's when we're trying to control that we resist, and when we resist, this is where we push grief or any other kind of emotion down in the body, including not being able to cry. Wailing is part of giving grief a sound. So if you're not feeling safe enough to cry, the tears turn inward. That's the pneumonia. That's the grief on the lungs trying to express itself. Or the stomach cancers that show up years later because you haven't been able to digest the loss or digest the grief or what happened to you. So I think it's important to just remember to not to try to fix grief for yourself or for anyone else. There's no fixing to be done there, especially when I think so often people start mourning the death before the person that's dying is left, and as a way to sort of anticipate that it will be easier when the person leaves. And again, we have to honor the living while they're living, and just try to support but not to impose too much meaning making on that. I think Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Searches for Meaning, I don't know if you know him, but he was an incredible man who wrote about surviving the concentration camps in the Holocaust. And, he survived in spite of it. We do get through it, don't we? But I think using our own experience to support others on their journey, one of the best gifts that we can give them is to not to try and make meaning for them.
Yes.
That we have to arrive in that place in our own timing.
Exactly. I think a lot of times we may feel expectations that are not real. I can say from personal experience, and my husband and I do videos on this kind of thing as well, and we talk a lot about this kind of thing. But for me, even as crazy as this sounds, a month or two after our daughter passed, everybody had gone back to their jobs as they should. That's the nature of the beast. And for me, I kind of felt like I was supposed to, pull my, self together and act like I was fine, and I wasn't fine. I was so not fine.
Yeah.
And but I felt like everybody was tired of hearing it, and I so desperately needed to say her name. I just desperately needed to say Isabella. And I want people to know when they're watching this that that is okay, that is good, it is healthy, it is healing, it is great. Shout their name out. Tell people their name. Know that you should not have a time limit. And like you were talking about, just make sure you sit in that area, that space, and feel those feelings. But know that you're still honoring that person.
I love what you said about saying her name, because I think that too it can almost become a sort of anchor in grief, a mindfulness practice of some kind, or a mantra. That is such a beautiful place of celebrating her life. As short as it was, Isabella becomes the mantra. I know that what sustained me through many moments of grief where I thought I could never get up again was just to let go of the outcome, to say this is not my responsibility, and to just just ask God, to hold that space for me of what it needed to be in the moment, and just to let the rest go, because we need those. We need the rituals. We need the anchors. This is why we have shrines and we have memorial plaques and we have a place to go, even though the spirit has left the body. It gives us, the ones that are left behind, it gives us a space to honor and celebrate that life. And
Yeah.
to keep showing up, I think, too. Isn't that another thing, too? It's like so many people, because the relationships change afterwards. You are not the same woman that you were before your daughter passed. And I think so often that makes people uncomfortable because they don't know how to be present in the situation because it's not the same.
Right.
And it's not about fixing it or being afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. And I think our fear of change or loss that we've experienced because of the change in the friends that have gone through loss makes it hard to show up. But I know that one of the things I say is please keep showing up, even if I'm pushing you away, even if I'm saying I'm fine when I'm not. Could you be witness to the feeling that you can feel because you're sensitive to me and you know me? And to just be consistent. The consistency is so important, isn't it? Because eventually people, when we push and we push when we're hurting, some people do go away. But I'm just always so grateful for those that stayed, sat in the waiting room or on the edges of the circle of my grief and just were able to just hold that space. They didn't have to say anything and they didn't have to do anything. I think it's important that we tell the people in our lives that too, that you don't need them to say anything or fix anything, and not lose your sense of humor. I think a sense of humor helps to build resilience too. Is not being afraid to laugh with someone who may be really tired, like you were, of people dodging the sensitivity of what you were feeling, and all you were longing for was some kind of honoring that she lived.
Yeah.
In the middle of all that upendedness. It's just the little things, isn't it? Like holding space that it just gives us hope that we're gonna be okay. We'll get through this.
Definitely. And that kind of brings me to, one of the biggest things I get questions about is from people who are not directly involved. It's the people that are friends and family who want help. But like you said, it's so awkward. You don't. They want to fix it. Because they love you and they want to make you better. And it's just not something that is their responsibility. And I think that people need to know that just sitting with someone, giving them a hug. I mean, I know some people are not touchy, but just a hug, being able to just be around somebody is helpful. What do you suggest in that kind of arena?
Yeah. Yeah, reaffirming what you said. I think it's not assuming that we know what another person could need, and coming from the one that is in grief to ask for what we need. So I think when we hold space for others, we have to use discernment and that sort of loving knowledge of how well we know that person or don't know that person to not, yes, we want to do right by them, like you said, but sometimes we do miss the mark because we can't fully know what that person needs at the moment. But if the context's right and the question's not too overwhelming for them to just answer in the moment, we can ask, what do you need? Or what can I take care of for you? And being on the receiving end of that, you might want to say, that's not what I need right now. So they might not, even know what they need. I know when we're so numbed out in the pain, we don't even know what we need, and we only realize it when they're offered something that we don't need.
Yeah.
But for example, like you said, if I was going to reach out and want to hold somebody in pain, and they may suddenly know that they don't want to be touched, because maybe that touch re-triggers the wound that they're trying to heal. I think it's very much honing our sensitivities, isn't it, to hold space for someone is going to be different. And for me, it's just to allow people the autonomy of discovering what they need and to find ways to have those needs met. And also to I think the best thing that we can possibly do is to see any kind of loss or grief that we're experiencing or witnessing for somebody else as a gift, to work on our own internal dialogue and our own reactivity. If we're triggered by somebody else, is calm your nervous system down first. It's kind of that old thing of put your oxygen mask on before you do that for anybody else. And I think often a failure to hold that space for someone comes from that triggered reaction, because their nervous system is being flooded by maybe a memory of a loss that they've had that they haven't possibly healed. And if your sort of fight, flight, freeze, or that sort of pain and befriend reactivity is being activated by a situation, you can't hold space well for that person until you're calming yourself down. So again, I'm just always in such deep appreciation of the gifting and receiving that happens in any kind of exchange, whether it's loss or anger or anything else that's going on. We get that opportunity to really sit in that compassionate inquiry and look at, gosh, what am I feeling right now? And if I'm sort of lashing out at people that love me, who want me to be okay. I know when I was in the depth of deep, deep depression, I could see that it was hurting the people around me. But, when you can just sort of take some deep breaths or find other ways of calming yourself down, and then starting to sort of re-engage with our own internal systems that help us respond more calmly, then we might realize, gosh, the anger that's coming out of this person's grief or helplessness isn't personal, and it's not a reflection of who I am being in the moment, or that I need to or that I need to fix anything. And I love in any kind of right relationship where there perhaps is that discomfort, or there is there's some kind of tension or conflict going on. And I think it was Brene Brown that I took that from, that was very kind, not only to the person that was in the conflict, but the person that you're projecting at. And that was to say, to take a breath and to just make eye-to-eye contact, to have those kind eyes and say, the story that I'm making up about myself is this, or the story I'm making up right now about this is. Because it kind of lowers those heart walls, for those barriers, for someone to be able to meet you and hold space without feeling like they need to defend themselves or protect themselves or get triggered by what we're doing or acting out.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing.
And I wanna ask about that too. So I think that when you are the person who has experienced the loss and someone else is triggered, and you're kind of speaking as they are triggered because they feel like they have to jump in and fix something, or they have to do, whatever it is, and they really don't know what you need. And sometimes, like you said, you as the person who is grieving, you don't know what you need either. But what if it's somebody who is kind of on the outside, but is really, somehow it's really affected them because they're very sensitive, and they are just beside themselves with sorrow, and that maybe the person who's grieving is a little angry about that, because they're like, hey, wait a minute, this is not your loss. So what would you say in that kind of situation?
Again, I think it's a very personal experience, but I think giving people permission to trust their own intuition and wisdom, to be able to notice the reactivity, to be able to apologize, to say, I'm so sorry. If you are the one that is lashing out because you're hurting,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps to know that, because we have no idea what our grief brings up in other people. I often have this conversation with people that are, like, for example, um, wanting to help in hospices or wanting to go to animal shelters and sit with people that are in pain, or animals that are traumatized and are in pain, and they feel like they will break into a million tiny pieces if they did that, because they're so sensitive and they're feeling the pain as their own. And again, I think it's a very moment by moment. It's about taking the small steps to be able to go, gosh, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. This is bringing up fear for me. This is bringing up, um, old wounds for me, and not needing to know what to do, to just go, this is just what it is. And to use the dialogue, if you're able to talk, just to say, this is the story that I'm making up. It's not real, it's not true, but this is how I'm feeling in the moment. And I think giving people only as much information as they can handle is a kindness as well. Because, when we can just, perhaps, as the one in grief, give just receive one simple instruction or one simple task to do, we're not overwhelmed. We're not flooding our system, our nervous system again, um, with more than we can process in that sort of tender time of breathing. And too much information can often trigger more of that response of not feeling safe, and perhaps feeling like incompetent or unworthy, or, as you were saying, angry that somebody's almost imposing on your experience. So I think not taking power away is also important. When we take decision making out of people's hands, we leave them often feeling useless and incompetent.
Right.
Um, so I think that it's going to be a moment by moment exchange of looking at, in this time, we need to step in and make hard decisions for people, especially when they're sort of dealing with, um, addiction or any kind of intervention that feels like the only thing that's going to save that person. It's going to be very much situational, but in almost every other case, I think people on both sides need the autonomy to make their own choices, even especially our children, because I think children have the most incredible resilience in dealing with loss that we lose as we grow up, and we become, layered with all the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, or of what we're supposed to do with grief. So, seeing the gift in how children even play at a funeral, or play when you go and visit your beloved's remains at a gravesite, can be the opportunity for you to really keep your own ego out of it. I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
And just get back to that place of, what would love do here? It's another one of the questions I love to ask all the time, and I give my clients to share, is, what would love do here with this feeling or this action?
That's
And to just hold space, not necessarily have to rush in, but just to hold space. It's that power of presence.
I love that. I love that because you are not you're saying to kind of process things and hold your emotions and understand them and learn how to kind of work and through them, not around them, and grow from them. But you're not saying to be stuck. It is completely a different thing. It is a way to work through something in order to, like you said, take the small steps. And that's something I tell my clients too. We're not going from A to Z. We're going from A to B and then B to C. We're going to take very small steps and be able to celebrate the fact that we are moving forward, not staying stuck. Um, and that is something that you have to make a choice for. If you're not ready to make a choice, there's not going to be that growth. You have to be able to process things by, like you said, making that space in order to be able to take those small steps and to recognize the gratitude and
Mm, and I love what you said in that the difference is that when you're leading or you're holding space for somebody that's going through that it's not going to be all forward either. It's just like you just feel like you're okay and that you've landed someplace where you can breathe again, and then something smacks you and you feel like you're right back in it, as if um, that procedural memory, and that's part of trauma. It's just like I do believe that there is some level of PTSD in this
right.
when we're not able to act out. And I think again, children are so good at showing us that until we've told them not to, because there's going to be fear of consequences or punishment or pain. Is we need to learn how to act out our grief again and make people feel safe enough to fail, because I think also when we're learning to live again beyond the loss, beyond the trauma of the loss and the grieving process, we're growing and we're going through grief or transition, and we're bound to make some mistakes along the way, right? To think that we have to get rid of and then think, oh no, I don't want to do that. And we're a little bit all over the place. But there are no mistakes. And when we can have someone hold that space for us or hold space for someone else going through that without the judgment and the shame, it's that incredible opportunity for both parties to really go deep inside, to find the courage, right? That inner resourcing, to take risks and know that we're strong, that we're going to be okay, even if we feel like we failed or we're not making progress. And I think that when we can let people know that, failure isn't failure, it's growth, because it's part of our journey toward, right, that whole circle of death and rebirth and living and dying. And um, it's an exhaustive process to keep beating ourselves up for it and making ourselves wrong, when we could actually be celebrating the little wins, those little steps that we're taking, as you said. So I think humility and thoughtfulness are huge, when it comes to that. To just remember our own humanness and our own fragility and our own impermanence, and to just know that it's not about being careful. I think careful always means there's something to be afraid of. I think it's about being aware, that this is a dance. This is a dance, and it doesn't come with a manual. It's different every time we go through it. That loss and death is part of living. And when we can start to surrender to the grace of that, that's when we really fully come alive in our own lives. That's the greatest honoring of death, I believe.
And I love that you said it doesn't come with a manual. You do take a couple of steps forward and then something will smack you. And it doesn't matter if it's a couple of months out or a few years out or, many years out, it's going to inevitably come up. But it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that you're human, like you said. And the fact that we take these small steps and we celebrate those wins can encourage us and give us the confidence to continue taking more and more steps and know that even though we have suffered, we don't have to continue to torture ourselves. We can take steps to honor that loss and
Mm,
use it as purpose, and we can reach other people and help them through these things. And we know, well, I know now that speaking about this more openly is both therapeutic for me, but it's also going to be therapeutic for others who I talk to. And I think that the more that we talk about loss, the more people will accept it. They will understand that it's okay to feel the way that they're feeling. It's okay not to rush through it, and it's okay to ask for help when they need it,
mm,
and better also to respond to others when they are going through their own loss. So, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you, is there, you know, can you kind of recap and tell people maybe your top few things that would help them when they are going through something Um,
I would just say, in sort of wrapping it all together is be willing to hold space. And no, it's not something that we can master overnight, or that we can adequately address in sort of like a few tips that are going to work the same way all the time. And I think to just be really compassionate, to be in that space of the more that you can practice compassion, the more that you can be witness to the things that make you uncomfortable, um, the more it's going to evolve and it's going to grow, and it's going to be unique to each person and every situation. And I think that trusting that you're never alone. I think isolation is one of the worst places to be, and one that we actually subconsciously often push people away.
yeah.
To remember that you're not alone, that there is support, and there is a place where you can um, fall into that circle.
Right.
And I love what you're creating, because it's a circle. It has no beginning and it has no end, just like the cycle of life and death. And that when people feel safe enough to fall apart without fearing that this is going to leave them permanently broken, or that they'll be ashamed by other people in the circle or in the room, um, there's a courage there that comes, and it isn't easy work. And I think that knowing that it's practice, it's mastery, it's part of being human, and to cut yourself some slack, like you said, practice self-love, practice self-care. And if you can't care for yourself, be willing and brave enough to ask for someone to care for you while you are falling apart. Um, I think that it can be a very beautiful process. I always say there's a gift on the other side of loss, of depression, of grief, of trauma. And there are no mistakes. You can't fail. You can't get this stuff wrong. And it's a moment by moment process. So give yourself permission to trust your own intuition, your own body wisdom. Don't ever think that people, because they care, are taking your power away. And ask for what you need. I think that's super important. Find ways to calm down your nervous system, whether that's meditation or going out for a walk in nature, or hugging your dog in a heap of tears and giving grief a sound. Following your body's natural impulse is the most vital component of coming back into wholeness again. And I think also what we are so quick to dismiss in the emotions, in the felt sense, in the somatic, visceral experience of how our bodies hold grief in place. So breath work, things like breath work, allowing your body to shake and shiver and tremble and wail, or whatever your body needs to do, give yourself permission to go there. And if it terrifies or makes you afraid, because the sound of grief is very primal, and I know I've certainly kind of shocked myself out of that grieving of releasing through tears or wailing many, many times. But no, you can come back. It's not going to go away. And every time you deepen that practice, it's going to get easier for you. It's not always simple, but it's easy. So I know we covered a lot, but
Well, I think just dealing with, like you said, having that space for the grief, but allowing your authentic self to come out. And I want to add one other thing you talked about with touching and allowing somebody to hug you and everything. We had stated that that might not be something you're comfortable with, but I would like to kind of interject and say, well, maybe you're not comfortable, but we're talking about sitting in those uncomfortable moments. The power of touch is just amazing. And if you do allow yourself to be loved, and you do by other people, and you do allow yourself to be touched, it can release a lot of tension in your muscles. Now, I know that's not certainly for everybody, but
Mm.
it may surprise you just allowing someone to just do something as simple as giving you a hug.
Oh,
Just,
it's huge. It's huge, and I so agree with you. I think we're all so touch starved anyway. And I know for me, just, being able to put my head on my mother's lap and have her, just stroke my head just
mhm,
was just the most loving act that she could do. And yeah, it's just like it's a holding space in itself. And if you can't let, if you're not kind of ready for somebody to give you a full on hug, I love that process, and I can't remember who came up with that, but just putting one hand under your armpit and the other hand
mhm,
on your shoulder, and just allowing yourself to feel that in your body can be incredibly calming for your nervous system. And I know it's kind of that natural process where your body then even almost wants to start to be rocked, like you would have been held as a child and be rocked. And I often find myself in that position to be very comforting. If there isn't anybody near you that you can ask for a hug, so use your own body wisdom
mhm.
to know that you can hold yourself too.
Definitely. So, Sarah Jane, I am so excited that you were able to join me, and I think that you have so much to offer. And in the future, I hope to collaborate with you again. Very interested about
Mm,
these
an
safari.
honor. Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's a beautiful process.
can you tell everyone where they can find you? If,
Yes, so yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So, if they go to Access Your True Nature, and it's spelled a little funny, it's UR, True Nature, they'll find all sorts of beautiful resources and just a lovely container to meet like minded people who are also doing the best they can with what they have to live well. And I'm of course on all the other places: YouTube, SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter. Not so much on Instagram, but many ways to reach out and know that people aren't alone. Where I think we can go so much further together in healing this collective grief. We're grieving at the state of the world and what we're doing to this beautiful planet and to the sentience. And um, I think that's a way to heal our brokenness, is to really come back to our hearts and to be in coherence with the heart of other people that might be on the same journey as you. So I welcome you into my circles as well. And I look forward to contributing with you again too. So
awesome.
thank you so much.
So, thank you again, Sarah Jane, and thank you for watching. I want to encourage you to join us for the other segments that are coming up. But we appreciate Sarah Jane talking about how to grieve well in this one, and we hope to see you soon.
Mm.
Bye.